This episode has very sensitive topics, is for mature audiences only, and contains depictions of various forms of trauma. Viewer discretion advised.
When I went into my parents' bedroom and he was standing there, he told me that he needed to teach me how to be a woman. And that's the first time he molested me. He started molesting my sisters and then keep me compliant by saying, well, if you don't want me to go to this sister, then you won't complain.
No.
I won't touch your sister. So that became a part of the control aspect. I started trying to fight him, and then he just became more physically abusive. Now, by this time, my mother knew that he was abusing me. It wasn't like I could go to my mom and say, Mommy, Daddy was choking me this time. I did not have any fear as far as giving birth was concerned. What I was afraid of was having a girl. My father could possibly target her. My father was still trying to date women, even though they were struggling financially. So he just put so much into a new woman to seduce her and bring her in. My mother we started having a lot of conflict. The reason why I was showing her attitude, according to her, is because I felt that I was on her level because I was having sex with her husband. So she told me one day, I stole her husband. She said, Aziza, I cannot compete with you because you're a child and a xual likes children. Of course, that created even more of a divide between us. And, I lost my mom from a very early age. And I did have a moment where I felt like, well, why are all of these things happening to me?
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you'd prefer to see our faces and our new studio, go to our YouTube channel at Cults to Consciousness. We love it when you guys interact with the post. It really helps boost the algorithm. It helps our guests feel seen and welcomed and validated, and we just love to read your comments. So today's guest, we found her through Instagram, actually. She has quite a big platform over there. Today we're specifically talking about high control people within a family dynamic. So within her family, her father was extremely abusive. She ended up having 5 pregnancies through him. We're going to be talking about all the ways in which he implemented extreme control in her household and control obviously over her and her entire family, and how she was able to escape that. So thank you so much for joining us, Aziza Kibibi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I was so happy when we finally connected. I think I'd been pinging your page for a while, but you get so much engagement. I'm sure it was hard to see all the comments. I was like, yay, I got her. She responded. So yes, your story it's a heartbreaking one. It is one that I personally can relate to in my own way from my own traumas. I feel like today's episode is going to be a little heavy for those who have any sort of traumas or backgrounds or hard time listening to CSA. Please take care today, or skip ahead if you would like, skip through the chapter marks, or just skip the episode. That's okay. We can catch you on the next one too. I just want to make sure everyone is prepared for the subject matter we are talking about today. And I just think it's a really important story to share because it is so common. I feel like people don't realize how incredibly common CSA is, especially within a family dynamic. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important to cover how families can essentially act like cults if there is a family member, tends to be the father in most cases, putting those methods of control on the family. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing and being vulnerable with us today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, Shanice, and I commend the work that you do, and of course send you continued healing energy for your experience. So
thank you. I appreciate that. So I think it's important to talk about how your father evolved into the person that he became, because it feels like initially things weren't that way until he started implementing some changes and taking on some new ideologies that essentially shaped your family.
Yes. So it's something, because I do get the question of if my father was abused in the past and what was his behaviors before he started abusing me or abusing my mom. And he was just a dynamic personality. A lot of people knew him. They respected him in our communities. As far as the point in my life where I became aware that people were drawn to him and people liked him, and we'd have these big family functions, and no matter what, if my parents gave a party, like the whole city was there. He was the popular guy in the town that we lived in. So when he started abusing me, there was this kind of this fear of, well, a lot of people like him. And of course, I'm a child. I'm only 8 years old. But because of my love and admiration for him, it did have an effect on how the seduction aspect of the abuse played out. Because I did love him, I respected him. And of course, as a child, you're proud of your father when other people like him as well. So as far as seeing the change, I saw someone that I loved and was fun. He loved to play with children. That's the thing. He really enjoyed playing with children. He gave me, my siblings and I, a lot of attention. He homeschooled us. He was really focused on kind of creating very intelligent children. So he exposed myself and specifically my brother to different technologies and topic matters and stuff that was really beyond our age range. But other than that, his interaction with my mom was loving as far as what I saw. And then one day I heard them screaming and he was yelling at her. She was crying. And this was from behind the closed door of their bedroom. And I think that was, as a child, I might have been maybe 6 or 7 years old, that I really was like, okay, this is a really scary side of daddy, inclusive of the fact that he was very strict. He was very strict. But he still did a lot of fun things with us. Like he would take us blueberry picking and going to see the Statue of Liberty was like a normal thing. Like he really exposed me and my siblings to a lot of things that other children in my family and at our age wasn't being exposed to. So as far as we was concerned, we had a fun life. But then, of course, when it came time for discipline, I mean, my father, he would beat us very bad. And I grew up seeing him even spank babies. And I remember like he spanked me when I was in a walker. I remember that clearly. He would spank my legs really, really hard. So clearly there were signs of his abusive nature, even though he was well-liked and extremely charismatic.
Yes, and I'm glad that you brought up the duality of that, where it's not always all bad and it's not always all good. There's a mixture of things, and that's what makes it so difficult when you have an abusive person, even within relationships outside of the family, where when it's good, it feels good and you want it to keep going. But then when it's bad, it can be really bad. And so understanding that both of those can exist at the same time. So I'm sure it was really confusing as a child. So you had mentioned to me in our call that he started learning some ideologies, maybe some African things that he wanted to implement, some polygamy, wanting to change names. How did that start to impact the family?
So he changed his name from Eric McGill, which was his given name, to Aswad Ayinde before I was even born. And interestingly enough, when he signed my birth certificate, he forgot that he changed his name. So, and he was a teenager. This is him at like 18 years old. And he did this legally. Yeah. And I think a lot of it was because of his self-education on the history of Black people in America. And he considered his given name to be his slave name because, of course, it was passed down through the generations originally to his ancestors by their slave owner. So he wanted to more embrace the roots of African Americans, which would be people from Africa who was brought here against their will, and adopt more of their culture into his lifestyle. So initially, my mom, her style of dress was more cultural, leaning towards an African type style. So she would wear turbans and long skirts. And my parents put me in African dance class. So there was a lot of just awareness of our African roots within the family. And he taught that awareness to my siblings and I as part of our homeschooling. I do remember at one point there was some conflict between my mother and father about him stepping outside of the marriage, him being unfaithful. And from there, and again, this is all from the perspective of a child. From there, then he would bring women over to the house, and my mom seemed to be okay with it. And yeah, at some point she would kind of get upset about certain things, but then before I knew it, these women were sleeping over. So it kind of went that way. And then I would hear him speak to the other men in the community about embracing a polygamous lifestyle because that is what African people practice and believe, especially historically. And it is the Black men's right to have multiple wives and so on and so forth. So that's how we kind of transitioned into, or he transitioned into polygamy. So I grew up essentially having, I wouldn't say multiple moms because my mom was who my father was married to and legally. And then everyone else, he would do like spiritual marriages with them. And yeah, my mom was the head disciplinary as far as who was able to interact with us and discipline us in that way. But then it just expanded and grew from there. So then more children were being born and so on and so forth. So it was a transition. It was more of a slow transition from my perspective.
How many siblings did you have at that point when more women were introduced?
Wow, I think 3, because I remember one of my dad's girlfriends had a baby for someone else, but she was the same age as one of my little sisters. And this was actually around the same time he started molesting me. So anyone before then, I don't remember any other women that had children. He wasn't the father of this child, but this was the first person that I was aware of. And then one of his other girlfriends, or he got another girlfriend and she had kids as well. And it kind of went from there. And then some of them, they gave birth to my siblings. They had children for him, but he never shied away from women with children. He just loved women.
So I'm curious what his religious beliefs were, because it seems like maybe a mishmash of things, or was any religion involved, or was it just this African way that he had grasped onto?
It was definitely a mishmash because at some point he was going to his mother's church. She was a Christian Baptist, and he was going there regularly and was very involved. If I remember correctly, they even offered for him to become a deacon there. He never took up the ministry, I think that's what you call it, but he also studied Judaism. He also studied commit. Like I remember at one point he was very involved with a religious group in New York. At the time it seemed pretty new, and the leader was titled the Shechem, and their belief system was rooted in Egyptian beliefs. And the Shechem had multiple wives, and My father took his family on a road trip to Virginia to go and witness one of the weddings. So he definitely explored various types of religion and kind of focused in on one at each time. At one point, he wore a Star of David and labeled himself as Jewish. Like I said, he was involved with Christianity, but it was more just definitely just a mashup. At the end of the day, he had his own belief system, or he structured his own spiritual belief system from aspects of different religions.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your day-to-day as a child. You said you were homeschooled and isolated, not able to have friends outside of the home. So what was that like for you?
Well, it was normal. It was normal for me because that is the only thing I was used to. It wasn't a circumstance where, oh, I was in school and then one day I was taken out of school. So I didn't really have much to compare it to. I think as a child, you are, I don't want to say susceptible because that makes it, well, no, you are. You're vulnerable to the belief systems of your parents, whether they're right or wrong.
Yeah.
So whatever my father decided was what it was. It was what it was, and it was the truth. When he decided to homeschool us, for me, I did not see that as different at the time as anyone else. It wasn't until I got a little older, and I would say probably about 7 years old, and I recognized that my cousins were going somewhere to go to school, and I wasn't. I was staying home. And at that time, my parents had a structured day for us as far as schooling. My mom was the teacher. We'd have tests. We were required to read books. And in addition, my grandmother's boyfriend or partner at the time worked with the Board of Education in some capacity. I'm not clear how, but my father would get a lot of textbooks from him. Now, they were way beyond our age level. You know, it was way beyond my age level. I think I was studying social studies from high school textbooks when I was 10 years old. And it was more information than what my cousins had access to. So then we became the cool kids. I became the cool girl as far as my cousins were concerned. Now, this is all before my father cut off communication or stopped me and my siblings from having access to our extended family. But my cousins thought we were the coolest thing around because we were very, very smart. Help them breeze through their homework because my brother and I were studying and functioning at a much higher level than the public school system in New Jersey in the 80s what were teaching kids. So they just looked to us to help them with their homework. And it was simple. It was easy for us. So at some point, someone my father knew who, I don't know if they worked for the Board of Education, but apparently they got wind of my brother's and my intelligence levels. So they wanted to come and test us. And my brother tested in the 98th percentile of some of the most intelligent children in New Jersey. And my test results were 15 points below genius. And they wanted to put us in a gifted program. And my father was completely against it. He said, well, why would you want to take these children out of the environment that gave them this high intelligence level in the first place? So I never heard from this person again. Now, interestingly enough, this was all very close to my father starting to molest me. And it's funny because I look back on how these stages in my life and in my upbringing lined up, and it's feeling so intentional from his part. I even was reading in a lot of my studies that a vegetarian diet, I don't know how truthful this is because, you can get information from different sources, even if they are accredited sources. But they said that the vegetarian diet makes a person more docile. And you'll find different cult leaders or different controlling people adopting or making their followers adopt a vegetarian diet so they are more agreeable with being controlled, so to speak.
Interesting.
Right. So now I'm like, okay, so my father turned vegetarian. I mean, him and my mom turned vegetarian a couple of years before he started abusing me. However, when I was a little child, when I was maybe about 1 year old, apparently he already decided to raise his children vegetarian. So my mom told me a story about my aunt trying to feed me chicken noodle baby food, and how my father had a fit. He also was against vaccinations. So apparently my mom took me to the doctor without his permission and got me vaccinated. And after that, I started displaying allergic reactions. I got eczema all over my body from the vaccination site. But at the same time, he was still eating fish. We wasn't allowed to eat any type of meat, but then he was still eating fish and dairy. But then at some point, it was recognized that I was allergic to fish. So when I think back on some of all of these behaviors and how they lined up with when he started molesting me, I was wondering, like, well, was all that intentional? You know, was some of the things that he was doing that seemed completely unrelated to the abuse, was it because he had learned or read somewhere that this would be a mechanism for control? I don't know, because I always wonder, even with other abusers, specifically sexual and physical abusers, like, you know, R. Kelly, P. Diddy, a lot of their behaviors are the same. And I'm like, I know they're not all sitting in a class getting tips on how to control people, you know, and how to intimidate people. But for some reason, they seem to learn these mechanisms and they end up working.
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about some of these mechanisms. Something that you had mentioned to me was that you thought that all fathers did this to their children. And so is that something that he intentionally told you or implied, or what were the ways in which he made it seem like what he was doing was okay?
So yeah, he told me just straight out. When that day I was 8 years old, and it was my mom told me that my father wanted to speak to me. And as I mentioned before, my father was strict. So if you got called away privately to talk to him, it was because he was in trouble. However, when I went into my parents' bedroom and he was standing there, it wasn't because I was in trouble. He was commending me and praising me, giving me accolades. And then he told me that he needed to teach me how to be a woman. And that's the first time he molested me. His explanation, he expanded on why he was doing what he was doing to me. And the reason was that all fathers did this with their daughters, and it was to teach them how to be a woman. So that was, you know, he explicitly told that from the jump. The other thing that he told me, of course, was that I had to keep it a secret. But then that was a conflict in my mind, because I'm like, well, if this is something everybody is doing, then why does it need to be a secret? But as a kid, you accept what your parent tells you and, you know, ask questions, maybe when you're an adult, years and years later. But at the time, yeah, I didn't question it. I wondered, well, that doesn't make sense, but okay. And that's what he maintained.
Okay. It seemed like there was a lot of moving around or unrest within your home life. Was this later down the road? When did it happen that you started building your own house?
When I was 14, by the time my father started molesting me when I was 8, then I started being more resistant and fighting him back when I turned 11. And that was actually after he sodomized me as punishment for taking his cheesecake.
Oh my gosh.
So it was at that time I was like, this can't be right. This can't be right, because it was so violating. With some of the other things, though I wasn't comfortable, though I didn't want to participate, my father did use seduction tactics, and there was a lot of grooming, a lot of explaining in a positive way. This seems like ironic to even say that, but making me accept what he was doing to me from a loving fatherly perspective. But then after he did that, there was nothing. It was painful. It was a punishment. Like when he starts using sex to punish his child, it was completely heartbreaking for me. And after that, I started resisting even more. Before I would question him, it would annoy him. But then after that, I started trying to fight him. And then he just became more physically abusive. Now, by this time, my mother knew that he was abusing me. So I didn't have an ally in the situation. So even though I was trying to fight back, it wasn't like I could go to my mom and say, Mommy, Daddy was choking me this time. So that was challenging for me. He cut off communication with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. He would not allow my siblings and myself or my mom to speak to or even acknowledge my grandparents, my aunts, my cousins. So now we were just completely isolated. Interestingly enough, though, we were isolated in my grandmother's house because we lived in a very large home in Patterson, and it was a mother-daughter situation where there was the main house and then there was an apartment attached. We lived in the apartment attached, and even though I saw my grandmother in passing outside, I mean, my time outside was limited as well. But the times that I did run into her, there were times I would take the garbage out. She'd be on the porch and she'd try to wave me down or speak to me, but I wasn't allowed to speak to her. So that became some of the isolation. And then I remember hearing a conversation between my parents where my father told my mom that we needed to get out of that place. We needed to move. And I think from there is when he decided to start looking for a home somewhere outside of Patterson. And that's when he found the house in East Orange. It was a dilapidated funeral home. I mean, way back, I believe like in the early 50s, 60s, and 70s, here in East Orange, it was a very affluent community. And there are a lot of very large homes, mansions on decent sized pieces of land. And he found one of these homes that had been shuttered. He got a great deal on it at the time. And he also received the first time home buyers grant from the city. And he renovated it. Now, after he purchased the house, we were driving back and forth renovating it. He stripped it down to its bones, and we were the construction crew. Most of the time it was me and my brother. My father would get us up 4:00 in the morning, take us to East Orange. We'd bust through walls, strip slats, put garbage out, dump garbage. Like, we were a working crew. We were a working construction crew. And then I don't know what happened, but my father suddenly wanted to speed the process along. And we weren't finishing the house or getting it to a point where it was livable quick enough. And then one day he just decided we're packing up and we're moving there. Even though it wasn't ready, even though it didn't have plumbing, even though it didn't have electricity, even though the roof, there was no roof.
What?
Like, there was so many things. Yeah. Listen, you would go into, when it snowed.
In the winter?
In the winter. Yes, in the winter. He ended up moving us into the house, and we moved into the basement because that was the only part of the house that was sheltered. He put up curtain walls, put up plastic, bought mattresses and carpet, and put it on the concrete floor of the basement. And that's where we lived. That's where we lived initially when we first moved there. And it would snow because we had some of our belongings, of course, in the upstairs part. And I remember going upstairs and just literally watching snow fall into the library and in different parts of the house because the roof, in places in the windows were open, so snow would blow in, and then the roof in the kitchen is where damage was, so snow would come in there. It was definitely an experience. Now, mind you, my father was taking my brother and I to work on the house, and after each day of work, he would then rape me there.
Oh my God.
So there was always that connection. And of course, it was completely isolated. He was still, I would say, strategizing while we was in my grandparents' house. But then when we would go to the house, he would have free reign and can do whatever he wanted to do. So that was a very difficult, the trauma of experiencing that has its own other implications that I don't think a lot of people understand.
Mm-hmm.
So he eventually moved us there. We were living in the basement, and that is where I got pregnant. Even without electricity, my father connected legally electricity from the street leading into the house, and essentially stole electricity from the city of East Orange and was able to plug up heaters. So before, we used a generator that had to be started every night. And then from there, started running electricity throughout the house. Then the next thing was plumbing, and it just built up from there. We didn't have plumbing at the time that I had my first child. So, imagine having a baby and your little brother and sisters are going outside and getting water from the outside faucet. So that was definitely an experience.
Oh my gosh, Aziza. So you had no pregnancy care, no prenatal care, no birth care, anyone who was qualified to help you have this baby in this unfinished home?
None whatsoever. By then, though, it was so normal because my father had already delivered many of my siblings. So, after I was born in the hospital, my brother, who was after me, was born in the hospital. But then my first sister, my father delivered in my grandmother's home, which of course created its own conflict. I remember sitting next door. We called it next door. My grandmother's portion of the home was, us kids called it next door. And my mom was in labor, and you could hear everything. I'm sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, and I could hear her, breathing and yelling out. And then my father called me in when the baby was about to come out. My sister actually was born breech.
Ooh.
And and the experience of her being born is emblazoned on my mind. And then after that, it was just a normal thing. My father delivered the rest of my siblings that were mothered by my mother, and also siblings who was mothered by his other girlfriends. He delivered most of his children.
Oh my goodness. I think we need to talk about your mom a little bit, because you had done a reel dedicated to this, and I think that's when we connected. You had said that your father explicitly told your mother, "I'm doing this to your daughter, and this is why." And I need to get some more information on that and talk about how your mother reacted to this.
I wasn't there when my father told my mom. I found out from her. She told me that he told her. The reason he told her that he was molesting me was to help my skin condition. Because remember, I was told that after I was vaccinated, a patch of eczema had developed at the vaccine site, and it just spread across all over my skin. So I also had a bunch of different allergies, not only the fish allergies, I also had untreated asthma. And I say untreated because my father did not believe in doctors. So as far as all of our health care and my mom's health care, he did it himself with holistic techniques and Chinese medicine. However, I would have these bouts of sickness where I could barely breathe, and I was just bedridden. Unfortunately, that didn't stop my father from abusing me. It got to a point where he told me that him abusing me while I was sick was a way of getting the evil and negativity out of me so I could get better.
Oh my God.
So when my mother then found out, or when he told my mother and she explained to me that he told her he was doing what he was doing to me because to help my skin, it aligned with some of the things that he was telling me about my negative energy. So she accepted it and then continued to reiterate to me that this was the reason.
So what was her reaction, though, when you got pregnant? Because she couldn't have thought that that was okay.
Well, apparently she did. As far as her demonstration of it, her outward demonstration of it. So when she found out that he was molesting me, I was 10 years old. So he started molesting me when I was 8. She found out when I was 10. By the time when I got pregnant, I was 15. So there's 5 years in between that her and I are dealing with me being abused by my father. And that experience through my prepubescent stages and the early parts of my adolescence, it wasn't abuse. I didn't know that it was abuse. This was a combination of what fathers did with their children, the fathers did to their daughters, and it was necessary, and this is what we were supposed to accept. But my mom did not accept it in a way where I then became her competition.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Wow. Okay, sorry, continue.
Yeah. I was around 12 years old, and I don't know if her and my dad were having conflict. And, even though she had accepted a polygamist lifestyle, she still had her moments where she was jealous because my father was a love bomber. He was a love bomber. When he got a new girlfriend or he met somebody that he liked, he showered all his attention on them. And I remember hearing debates back and forth about money between my parents because my father was still trying to date women, even though they were struggling financially. So he just put so much into a new woman to seduce her and bring her in. And then my mother started being very, I don't want to use the word antagonistic, but we started having a lot of conflict. Apparently, according to her, I started showing her attitude. And the reason why I was showing her attitude, according to her, is because I felt that I was on her level because I was having sex with her husband. So these are her words from her perspective. So she told me one day that I stole her husband. And I'm looking at her and I'm just like, well, how does that even make sense? And she says, you stole my husband from me. She said, Aziza, I cannot compete with you because you're a child and a xual likes children. Of course, that created even more of a divide between us. And, I lost my mom from a very early age. She wasn't my mom. She was according to her, I was her competition. She was my sister wife. It's like the dynamics of our relationship became even more complicated. And mother-daughter relationships are complicated, but it became even more complicated and just toxic in general because of what my father was doing to me.
Oh my gosh, what a mess. I can't imagine what kind of brainwashing your mother was, I don't know if accustomed to is the right word, but exposed to make her twist her reality in a way that fits your father's narrative. Now, obviously, your father is very charismatic, and those type of people, those type of cult leaders and people who want power and control, they do have ways of shifting the narrative to make people believe it. And I've been there. I've been under the control of people like that, and I know what it's like. And part of you is like, doesn't quite make sense. But then another part of you is like, well, I'm supposed to trust them while they seem to have my best interests at heart. And also,
Right.
you're a child. So as you've mentioned, of course, you're going to follow what your parents are saying and not question anything. And you're so isolated, cut off from family. You're not going to school. You don't know that it should be different, even though it doesn't feel right. So, wow. So how many people were in that home, that unfinished home? You had just had a baby and you have other siblings now too, right?
Yes, yes. So by then my mom had, hold on, I have to count. She's had 9 children, including me.
Wow.
Yeah, so by then there were 7 children, and then my mom and dad. Yeah, living in a room that was taped off with it sounds like it sounds unreal. Like sometimes I think about and I tell my kids the stories and it's like, wow. Humans are so adaptable, and you can put us in all kinds of conditions and we make the best of it.
Well, you have to, right?
Right. You have to survive. And I understand the terminology survival of the fittest. My father took the small piece of land that this house was on, because this is still a metropolitan area, even though this house reflected what East Orange was. Houses had been built up around it, and there was a U-Haul built right next to the house. So what he did was he put up privacy fencing, tilled all of the ground that belonged to the property, that belonged to him, tilled it up. I actually did a lot of the tilling with a pickaxe, and planted fruit trees and a garden in the back. So at this point, he decided to stop eating dairy. He decided to stop eating processed foods. And we grew mostly everything. We grew mostly everything that we ate. I was responsible for it. I did pick up a love of cooking. And I started being interested in cooking before my parents separated me from my grandmother. And I would watch her make fried dumplings, and she was a Jamaican woman. And I just was so fascinated by the idea of taking these raw materials and creating something completely different. So I guess that might be the scientist in me. And then my father also cooks. And I think because he was kind of adopting this holistic vegetarian lifestyle, he started doing things like baking bread from scratch and making cakes from scratch. And this is the duality of him. He made all of his children's birthday cakes. Before the abuse got worse, he was like the biggest kid. He loved throwing birthday parties for his children. And so when I started showing interest in cooking, he fostered that. And my mom would have me cut up the vegetables and contribute to making dinner. Then when I got a little older, my parents started leaving me home with my siblings when I was 9. At the time, they would not allow me to use the stove. So the most we could eat was like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But then they started leaving home for longer and longer periods of time. And then when my little sister was born, my mom breastfed all of her children. She would be gone for hours, and my sister would just be crying because, of course, she would breastfed and she would not pump milk. So, I was developing all of these skills just to take care of my siblings. And that expanded into cooking, so that I had to get creative with trying to give them food that wasn't just cereal or peanut butter and jelly sandwiches without using the stove. And just having to do all of those things, I think, just sparked my ingenuity. So now by the time we're moved into the house in East Orange, I immediately took to growing all of the food and cooking with open flames, because of course we didn't have the resources. I remember the only thing we had was my father plugged up or connected electricity was what was called at the time a decosonic. It was basically a tabletop oven, a tabletop convection oven. And I learned to like bake cakes in that thing and cook rice in an oven. Like it was, they say that necessity is what is the term? Necessity is the heart of invention.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that was the case living in this house. So
what was your recovery like being so young and having a newborn?
Oof.
And not having any medical help?
In my father's words, I bounced back. So as far as the medical help, that didn't seem too out of the ordinary because I had witnessed and contributed to delivering so many of my siblings. So this is just what it was, what do you need a doctor for? A baby comes out, mom cleaned it up, cut the umbilical cord. So I did not have any fear as far as giving birth was concerned. I had seen it so many times. It was a natural process. What I was afraid of was having a girl. I was not afraid of actually giving birth. I was afraid of having a girl because then my father could possibly target her. So even while we were in the house, that's when he started molesting my sisters. And before he started doing that, when he was only abusing me, he would require me to do all kinds of things. And I mean, my father was really demented. So he would basically experiment on me in different ways sexually and then keep me compliant by saying, well, if you don't want me to go to this sister, then you won't complain. If you do this with a smile, then I won't touch your sister. So that became a part of the control aspect. So there were the threats to my life, the threats to my mom's life, the threats to my siblings who did not have birth certificates because he delivered them at home. And he used all of these things to maintain control. Well, in his words, if the government doesn't know that they're alive, then they won't know that they're dead. So that was a part of the control mechanism as well. So when I had a baby, she had no birth certificate. She immediately became one of his bargaining tools. Now if you accept that he was capable of love, whatever that looks like. My father adored my daughter when she was a baby. Even my other children, he considered them his royal blue blood children. So a lot of the things that applied to my siblings and myself through any forms of punishment or whatever we had access to, it was completely different when it came to my children. He did not hit them. He did not yell at them. Like, he took on this whole different parenting behavior. Interesting.
And my mom became jealous of that. So then she started building even then animosity towards my children because in her mind, from her perspective, he treated my children better than her children because he was molesting and raping her children.
Oh my gosh.
The different forms of control that he put into place is just uncanny. It's really uncanny. And it's like, but you have no one teaching you these things. He was just figuring it out as he went along.
Wow. How long before you became pregnant again?
I became pregnant not too long before. As soon as my menses came back, he intended to just get me pregnant again.
Oh,
and he did have a concern that one of his girlfriends brought up the fact, when she found out I was pregnant, she brought up the possibility of my daughter being born with defects, biological defects, but because of the close relationship, which my father did not like at all, but I think he became concerned. So then when my daughter was born without any defects that we could see, then he was focused on, well, now he's just going to breed me and continue to make blue blood children.
Oh my gosh. So
Wow. He is intentionally getting you pregnant, intentionally impregnating his daughter.
Yes. Yeah, no, it was not, after the first time, it was not by accident.
Wow.
Very intentional.
Were you even healed up before he started abusing you again?
No. And I'm glad you have been the first person to ask me that question. No.
Wow.
No, I was not. I was not. And my mother said something about it because, of course, she'd had so many children. You know, she knew health wise, no, you're supposed to wait. You know, a woman has to heal. No, my father completely ignored that with me.
Wow, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have a 10-month-old, and so birth is still fresh on my mind. And I just can't imagine, especially being so young, how you went through that and he just continued to abuse you and get you pregnant again. I can't imagine that in my head.
You're the first. Thank you for thinking about that because
It's a big deal.
yeah, it is.
Yeah. Oh man. So, how old were you by the time you tried to escape? And how many kids did you have?
So I've tried to escape when I was a child. I tried to escape when I was 12.
Oh.
Yeah, I tried to run away when I was 12. It was one of the times that is something I think about these moments. There was one time my brother and I plotted to kill my father. But the one time that I tried to run away, my parents were gone. I had by that time been responsible for leading my siblings in their lessons, you know, homeschool lessons. I was teaching them how to read and write and do math, everything else. I put them in front of the TV watching Reading Rainbow. So we wasn't allowed to watch regular TV, but we could watch educational TV. So PBS was our channel to go to. They was watching Reading Rainbow, and I put them in front of the TV to distract them. I had already packed a bag, and I decided that I was going to try to run away through my grandmother's house. So we had the front door on our apartment, but if you went through the back, you could go through my grandmother's house and go through her front door. And I knew no one was home at my grandmother's house. Technically, we weren't allowed to go next door anymore by then. But I put the kids in front of the television and I snuck out. And I realized I heard something by the time I made it to my grandmother's foyer. And my brother and my siblings had caught me. And my brother asked me, well, Aziza, if you leave, what's going to happen to us? And at that moment, I just was overwhelmed with this responsibility to now even protect them even further. And also shame that I, in the moment, was willing to leave them to deal with my father. So I changed my mind, went back with the kids, begged them not to tell, because that was the other thing. My father raised us to tell on each other. And I had my little sister. She was, oh my gosh, I call her my arch nemesis was born into my family because she did everything she could to get me in trouble, I swear. So I literally had to beg her not to tell that I tried to run away. And then after that, I would say maybe about a few months to a year later, things were getting tough again. You know, I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. My father was more and more violent. I decided, me just trying to figure out on a regular basis how to escape the situation. One of two things, either how to convince him to stop doing what he was doing to me, or how to get away from what he was doing to me. And I decided to test to see what would happen. Because now I'm questioning, well, Aziza, if you were to run away, you don't know that daddy will beat your brothers and sisters. You don't know for a fact. He says that he will if you disobey him, but you don't know for a fact. So let's test and see what would happen. We had bunk beds. So this apartment, even though it's a big family, only had 2 bedrooms. And my father had built bunk beds for us. And the bunk beds were slightly raised, so there was space under them that he then built drawers to go underneath. So I decided to wait till my parents left. When I heard them come home, I hid behind the drawers. I was slim enough to hide behind the drawers and just waited to see what would happen. And my parents came in. Things were just normal, regular. He didn't ask for me, which was a little surprising because I'm usually the first person he asks for. Things were normal. And then I would say probably after about 30 minutes, because him and my mom was talking. He was a lecturer. He could talk for hours. He would like talk our ears off for hours. They were talking about business stuff. And then he called me. And when I tell you, it took every fiber because I was just so conditioned to responding to like him calling me.
Yeah.
I had to like stop myself from getting from under the bed. And he called me again and there's no response. He called me. And then I hear him say, "Where's your sister?" You know, he starts asking the kids and they're like, "I don't know," because I guess they didn't realize at what point I decided to hide. And he's getting angrier and angrier. Then he tells one of them to go get the belt. And that's when I decided to come out. And it was just confirmation to me like, okay, you know, if I was to disappear, they would definitely get punished for it. So that was the first time I tried to run away. After that, it was more trying to strategize because then it just became about, of course, the more children that was born, the more difficult it was to escape.
Yeah.
The idea of it, I would have nightmares about running away and you know, there'd be a newborn and I had to figure out how to breastfeed them and trying to find food. And so there was that stress. And of course, having my mom, I remember when my brother and I plotted to kill my father, we decided that we was going to surprise them and I was going to hit him over the head with a hammer and we was going to knock mommy out and just shoot for the door. We didn't fully think through, well, what would happen to mommy? We knew we wanted to kill daddy, but we didn't think through what would happen to mommy. But then her role in the family structure, of course, she became a person that I had to strategize and navigate around. And then the more kids I had, and my father was the breadwinner. So there was just all of these dynamics. And it was like, well, how do I get away from this situation safely?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until now my third child, my first son for my father, there were some complications with him. He had gotten sick as a newborn. I got really sick. It turned out I had a slip disc. I couldn't walk. It was affecting my sight. We was very malnourished. My father had stopped me from going outside. You know, he also physically abused me all through my pregnancy. It became an understanding that if you was pregnant for my dad, there was less of a chance of you getting punched in the face. Like that became the philosophy because he didn't want to harm the baby. However, my second pregnancy, he did beat me and he sodomized me and I miscarried. So then when I was pregnant, I got pregnant with my second daughter right away. And then my son, when I was pregnant with him, my father was just angry all the time. So yeah, I felt his fists a lot during my pregnancy with my son. And I think just the stress probably had an effect on him, even while I was pregnant with him. So when he was born, he was healthy when he was born, but eventually he became sick. And my father went away. My son was 5 months old and he woke up with seizures. I didn't recognize them as seizures at that time. I thought it translated to me that he was dying and coming back to life. My brother, who is now an adult, had been sent out into the world by my father to help the family make money. So my brother was working as an editor and a special effects editor in the music industry, and then sending his money back to my father to help take care of the family. He happened to be visiting that weekend, and my father was out of town. So when my son woke up with seizures, he convinced my mom to allow him to take me to the doctor. Long story short, I'm in the hospital. Now, all of this time, yes, I'm trying to strategize, figure out, try to see little opportunities, trying to recognize the opportunities to kind of cry for help or try to figure out, well, who would care enough, or because my father, there were other people that knew that I was my father's daughter. So he surrounded himself with people that protected him.
Yikes.
So I'm in the emergency room and they give me paperwork to fill out. I don't know anything about this. And I decide to fill out the paperwork that my father is also my children's father. And that raised a red flag. So, and this is the thing, one of the reasons why I started Precious Little Ladies, Inc. is to really identify the weaknesses in different policies and social systems that essentially allows cases of abuse to fall through, because even though it triggered a red flag, the hospital staff did not inquire directly to me as far as, you know, what services or help that I needed or try to get any more information. They called social services only after my father had come to the hospital and he was alerted of what had happened. My mom called him. He got on the first plane back and he came to the hospital and he threatened the hospital staff. He screamed and he yelled and he said, what are they doing to his son? Because he comes in. It turns out my son's seizures was caused from malnutrition. And he was deficient in vitamin D and calcium. And he was developing rickets and rosaries. And it was causing his brain to essentially misfire. That's what a seizure is. So the only way my son's veins were so thin, the only way they could access his system to give him high doses of vitamin C and vitamin D was through his head. They had to shave his head and get a vein directly through his scalp. So when my father saw that, oh my gosh, yeah, that contributed to him having a fit. He started cursing, of course, the medical community and telling him, take this thing out his son's head right now. He's taking his son home. And that then raised the red flag because he was trying to take the baby out of the hospital against medical advice. After that, DCP&P, at the time known as DIFUS, they came in. And unfortunately, by this time, and I skipped a whole part. Because there's a lot. By this time, our house in East Orange was struck by lightning, burned to the ground.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
The one that you were building.
Yeah. And this was just before it was finished. So we got to a point where it was livable. My father ran plumbing. There was electricity. We had our own rooms. It was wallpapered and painted. It was a beautiful place. And this happened to coincide just when my father went from being an interior designer / cabinet maker into music video production. He really wanted to get into film production, but he saw music video production as a path into film production. So that's when he met different hip hop artists and was impressing them with this beautiful mansion that he had, built with his own two hands and his family. We had marble floors and granite kitchen tops, double wall ovens. So it really ended up being a beautiful place. And then it was struck by lightning. Woke up one night and there was smoke everywhere. And my father was like, everybody, get up, get out. We go outside, happened to have a U-Haul truck. It was raining at the same time. And when the neighbors called the fire department, called 911, fire trucks came, they didn't have water in the trucks. And and apparently the fire hydrants hadn't been tested and no water was coming out the fire hydrants. So we literally sat there and watched our house burn. Ended up moving in with my father's best friend, who was an East Orange police officer. Stayed with him for about 6 months. My father continued to abuse my sisters and I through the whole time.
Wait, pause. Aziza, you stayed with a police officer and you had children with your father and he didn't say anything?
He did not question anything. And he knew me. He knew me from when I was young. What? This man met me when I was 13 years old. Knew that I was not allowed to have boyfriends. I was not even commended and respected my father for how he was raising his daughters.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. You know, 2 families in a house it's not going to last for very long. You have 2 heads, very strong-minded heads of households. They became very conflicting. And then my father ended up moving us down to South Jersey. So by the time everything else with my son being in the hospital, this was in Monmouth County, New Jersey. The community that we lived in, we were the only Black family there. So when the caseworker approached me, the first thing she says to me is that I'm taking your children and you stink. And I was like, well, I guess I can't look to you for help.
Oh my gosh.
And whenever she would ask me questions, I would tell her. By that time, I was trained that my father was my husband. And I would tell her, you have to talk to my husband. I can't answer any of your questions unless my husband was around.
How old were you? Were you still under 18? Still a child?
Hold on. No, I don't think so. This is my son. So by this time, I'm 20 or 21.
Okay.
I look like a child. I mean, I look at pictures of myself and I'm like, well, I look like I'm 15 years old. But, you know, I don't know if that played a role. And she just kept insulting me. Then at some point she did speak with me, but I was too afraid to talk to her. And then at one point, my father was on the phone. She was trying to speak with me and he called my cell phone and he spoke to her through the cell phone and told me everything. I had to report to her questions, you know, based on him, report to him her questions, and then he would answer them. So again, thinking about like systems in place that's supposed to help, I'm like, well, how do you not see this
as
a situation? Obvious. Yeah, that there clearly is a toxic control dynamic, because if I'm not even speaking to you, my father was present every time she spoke to me or any law enforcement spoke to me. He was there at the same time, even with the hospital staff. Now, Shanice, when I tell you, this is how, as far as how the role that God has played in my life. I mean, I'm not a religious person. I am a spiritual person, but I do believe that there is a higher power. It turns out all the way in South Jersey, the nurse for my baby boy was actually my cousin.
What?
When I saw her, I recognized her from when I was little. And she got the word back to my family back up north, what was going on.
Oh, I just got chills.
At some point, I saw her speaking to the caseworker and I heard her say, well, I thought I overheard her say, I mean, there was so much going on at the time, but I believe she told her that this man was my father. And she tried to intervene, but the caseworker wasn't receptive. She just told me she was taking my children and that was it. So there was definitely this trust, right? I had this evil person in my life controlling everything that I did and everything that happened to me. But he also instilled in me a fear of outside social systems. He taught me that white people didn't like Black people. He taught me that the police was only out to imprison us and beat us. And, you know, so I had this fear of anyone on the outside even trying to help. And then this lady kind of reinforced that fear. And I struggled with, well, do I deal with the evil that I know, which I've managed all of this time, or try to explore the evil that I don't know? And this was like always the choice that I felt like was placed in front of me. So it was really about just testing different systems. However, I do see this moment, even though it wasn't a pleasant moment, essentially, yes, they did take my children away from me, but I had to look at that in a way where at least my children were away from my father and did not, risk getting abused by him.
Did that kill you inside?
Oh my gosh, it did. It did. It really did. It was having your children taken away from you is I can't even describe it. Honestly, I can't describe it. It was like someone ripped my heart out. I didn't know what to do. My entire mind, and I did have a moment where I felt like, well, why are all of these things happening to me? Then there's the question of, well, maybe daddy, because even though my father made me call him by his first name and tried to instill in me that I shouldn't see him as my father anymore, I still did. In my head, I called him daddy. So I kept kind of asking, well, why me? Why is it daddy has to hurt me? Why do these things have to happen to me? And then even through the process, my entire family, because the woman went to our house to get my kids, but she didn't get my siblings. She didn't take my siblings out of the house. So it was like, well, there's suffering within our family structure, but then I was the only one who was suffering even outside of it. Like having your children. She didn't try to help me. It was just she took my children away from me. And it was heartbreaking. But then at the same time, I just knew what I had to do to get them back safely and figure out a way to bring them home to different circumstances than what we had already been living under.
So how did you do that? So you had 2 children at this point.
No, I had 3.
You had 3
children.
Wow.
Yeah, I had 3. And so during this process, I think my father started to recognize a growth change, or me feeling, or I must have been displaying signs that I was being empowered by the things I was learning when I would have to, let's say, go to court for a status review, because it was mandated. DCP&P at the time mandated me for like parenting classes. They brought me a list of things that I had to do in order to reach the goal of what they called reunification. And through that, I learned a lot. There were some people who were helpful. My children were separated while in foster care, so each of them had different caseworkers. One of their caseworkers seemed like he recognized that there was another controlling element, because there was one time I had a phone conference with him, and I guess based on how I was responding, my father was there for all of my phone conferences to make sure I didn't say, anything that would implicate him or try to reach out for help. And one of the phone conferences, I guess the caseworker must have recognized that I was speaking in a way that to him, then he asked me, he says, is there somebody there with you? And he told me how to answer. I don't know how, so it wouldn't set off the person that was there with me. I said, yeah. And he says, does this person abuse you? And I answered based on his instructions, and I said yes. And then he asked me some other questions to kind of confirm. He asked me about if I was afraid of this person, like different things like that. And I thought in a moment, wow, okay, finally, maybe something is going to come of this. Nothing came of it. He just ended up ending the conversation. He asked me, was I afraid for my life? I responded, yes, and at the same time, my father is there trying to listen in. So during this whole period of me working to get my children back, my father was extremely abusive and controlling. He accompanied me to anything that DIFUS mandated for me to attend and complete. He raped me again during that time. I got pregnant with my last child by him. I then had to try to explain that, which we'll be on here for hours if I went into all of that. But then at some point, my father actually met another spiritual leader. I don't know if my father considered himself a spiritual leader, but he had followers. He had men who would sit and listen to him talk for hours. He had, a mechanism, a group of people that essentially had adopted his lifestyle and believed a lot of the things that he said as far as the dynamic between male and female, and the man is the leader and the woman's supposed to listen. Of course, if your woman don't listen, you're supposed to knock her upside of the head. And they ingested and applied all of these things to their lives and their relationships. Not to mention all of his business people who invested in his work and gave him money. And then when he started producing music videos, he was getting public recognition. So I think everybody just kind of seeing his power and success grow, they then felt that there was truth or proof in what he was doing and the things that he believed. He ends up meeting this spiritual leader that he seemed to have respect. Like, he was the first person that I recognized that my father actually revered and respected. And he would allow, there was one day he called each of us in, my mom and myself, to speak with this guy on the phone. And I was in shock. So I was like, you're letting any of us speak with somebody without your presence? Speak with them privately? That was my opportunity.
What did you say?
I said to him, when my father left the room, I said, I have to tell you something. And he was like, what? I said, you have, please, please, please don't tell him. Please don't tell him that I told you. He said, no, it's fine. You're safe. And I said to him, I said, Swad is not my husband. He's my father. And I told him everything. And from there, he used his influence to then try to direct some of my father's behaviors. He took my mom to report domestic violence, and eventually he was able to put my family somewhere safe and not give my father access. And there was one time in between that, I mean, like I said, there's a lot. There's a lot. There's so many different stages, so many different layers. So in time, this is still happening, because remember, I'm trying to figure out how to do this safely, how to do this without. I've witnessed my father choke my sisters. He's choked me. He's done things to babies and children. So yeah, there is this fear that he will take a person's life. He beat me to the point that I was completely knocked out. And my face was just distorted. I have a lump on my nose right here. It's from he beat me. And I'm like, because we never got any medical help, I don't know if anything was broken or fractured. It just healed that way. But there was one time, now here I am, I've done some parenting classes. I'm reading pamphlets. I'm in these waiting rooms. I'm seeing posters. Now I know what abuse is. I've learned what abuse is. I've learned what domestic violence is. I've learned what pedophilia is. And it was building in me this confidence that really was wanted to burst out. It was building in me this like liberation that wanted to burst out. And one day it did. So in the process of this other person trying to maneuver a way to get us away from my father doing the least damage, my father was taking one of my sisters into a room to rape her. And she was actually pregnant at the time. And I stopped him. I stood up to him. I cursed him out. My mother was there. She was standing right there, allowing it to happen. Cursed him out, cursed her out, and then took her in the room and locked the door behind us. And the next day, my father was gone. His reaction to me standing up to him, I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I think I was just so enraged in the moment that I didn't consider the consequences. It was probably one of the one times that I was just like, F the consequences, I have to do this. But he was in such shock that he just sat down quietly.
Whoa.
Yeah, he sat down quietly. I think he just saw me as somebody completely different. And after I locked my sisters and I in the room, and when we came out the next morning, he was gone. And that was the last time that I had been in that close proximity to him until I had to testify against him in court a few years later.
Oh, wow. So he impregnated your sisters as well?
2 of them, yes.
Wow. Just the courage it must have taken for you to stand up to him in that moment. I bet the mother instinct in you came out full force too.
Yeah.
And just everything that's ever wanted to stand up and do something about it. Wow. That's amazing that you could do that for your sister while she was pregnant. Oh my gosh. I'm just like, I'm holding back tears because it's just so sadistic that he would do something like that perpetually and just, I don't know, I could go on for days, and I know that you know that and how wrong it is on so many levels. So you were finally able to escape. Were you able to get your children back, or how long did that take?
It took 3 years. I got them back 10 days before they went up for adoption.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a very close call. And I ended up getting a lawyer halfway through the process. And once he saw how their caseworker was behaving, he says, oh, she's racist. Everything she's doing and saying is racist. We have to get your case out of Monmouth County. So that was his goal. Ended up getting the case transferred to Essex County. And that's where finally there was some work being done to support reunification. So the first thing the caseworker in Essex County did was reach out to family to see if there was anybody willing to be my children's foster parents. And the people on my father's side, even though they were actually foster parents, or people on my father's side who were foster parents, did not want to take the children. So then they reached out to my mother's side, did whatever it is that they had to do as far as checking backgrounds. Like there's this whole process. And essentially my aunt, who still lived in the house with my grandmother, then agreed to become their foster parent. So between my grandmother and my aunt, was able to become my kids' foster parents. So my kids ended up partially growing up in the same house that I did.
Oh my gosh.
Ironically, yeah.
That must have felt good, though, to have family who you could trust, have your children.
It really was. It really was, because my oldest daughter, she was traumatized. She was 5 at the time she was taken away. And I was getting reports that she was banging her head on the wall and she wouldn't eat. And it was a shock for her. It was a shock for her. She was taken away from the only family that she knew. I don't think within the family she really recognized how harmful it was. She had witnessed my father beating me at different times, but it was normal to her. It was normal to her. And because how my father treated my children compared to the other children, to my siblings, she didn't have that abuse, so to speak, in that way as my other siblings did. Me and my other siblings. So when she was taken away essentially from her mother, it really affected her. Yeah. My second daughter completely forgot who I was because I wasn't allowed to see them for almost a year. So when I saw her again, she didn't recognize me. So that was painful for me. That was painful for me. So yeah, it was a huge relief that then they was going to be with family. And I was able to start visiting them more regularly, rebuild our relationship. And then I finally was able to bring them home.
Oh, wow. What a journey. The heartbreak you must have experienced, just immeasurable, but also the survival instinct of getting yourself safe so that you can bring your children back and dealing with the courts and dealing with all these caseworkers and lawyers, and what a nightmare.
It's something because I was raised so isolated from the world, and then I had to like
Dive
have a
in.
crash course. Yeah. A crash course, which essentially informed the work that I do, which essentially inspired me starting Precious Little Ladies.
Yes. So tell us about that.
So Precious Little Ladies Incorporated, also known as PLL nonprofit. Our mission is to end child sexual abuse, incestuous abuse, and gender-based violence. And we do that using media and social media. We also provide support services for survivors, but our biggest focus is prevention. So we do a lot of awareness raising. We give out tools to parents, families on how to talk to their children based on their age about abuse so that they can help keep them safe, help them identify the resources within their communities for if the abuse was to happen, and also find other tools that would help them prevent the abuse in the first place. Try to educate us on the topic as much as possible, because I really believe that these things can be brought to a halt. Like, they can stop with enough time. May not be in my generation, may not be in my kids' generation, but eventually, if we really change how our society and culture looks at abuse, survivors of abuse, and get people, policymakers, and different social services to understand the psychological impacts of abuse and how that could be long-term, then I think we can change a lot of people's minds, including abusers. I mean, there are many abusers that have been abused themselves. There are others that have had different life experiences. And I think that we could, catch them ahead of time before they actually decide to act on some of their feelings and urges.
Yeah. So
that is our mission and goal. And part of it, as far as policies are concerned, one of the things that we're doing, and it is a very personal effort on my part, is to change the law in New Jersey concerning incest. There are 3 states in America where incest is still legal.
What?
And New Jersey is one of them. Yes, New Jersey is one of them. So right now I am working with legislators to create Aziza's law that would make incest in New Jersey illegal. We'll criminalize it. And part of that, I learned that through the case against my father. So my sisters and I reported my father in 2005. He was detained in 2006. He was imprisoned, made bail. I think the bail was $50,000. Then showed up at one of his status hearings with an 18-month-old. Even though, because of the nature of the charges, he was not allowed to be around children. This is just to show you his arrogance.
Wow.
Yes.
The audacity.
So they imprisoned him again, and I think the bail was $1 million, which of course he could not cover. It didn't go to trial until 2010 for my sister. And then when he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the crimes he committed against her. And my trial happened in 2013, and he got 50 years for his crimes against me. Now, this is the kicker. Part of his defense was that I was older than what I'm claiming that I was, and my children are younger than they are. Why is he claiming this?
Because you don't have birth certificates.
Right. Well, that was one of the things I was required to get in order to get them back. So I got them birth certificates, right? And I had to prove that I had them during the years that I had them. So that part was taken care of. But he was trying to say that since incest is legal in New Jersey, I was consenting.
Oh my gosh. You can't consent if you're a child.
That didn't matter because he was trying to say I was older, that I wasn't a child when he started abusing me. He was trying to say that I was 16 when he was trying to abuse me, when he was abusing me.
Oh.
That's clearly a loophole, right? That people can use, that abusers and predators can use to coerce someone who was a child and convince them that they are consenting if they continue the abuse as an adult. And I think when the law was made, that wasn't taken into consideration. We know a lot more now about the psychological impacts of child sexual abuse than we did when these laws were created. So right now I'm educating legislators on those things so then we could change the law. Because even at the end of the day, I'm like, but the other 47 states,
Right.
that's illegal in the other, like, maybe someone should look into that. So it's been a 6-year journey for me on that effort specifically.
Oh my gosh, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, and we're out of time. So I'm really annoyed. Maybe we can do a live or a second episode or something, but
Sure.
I just have to commend you for all of the work that you have put in, for never giving up on getting your children back, for being willing to come forward with your story and be vulnerable about this, because I'm sure that's also difficult, just being open and telling people what happened to you and advocating for other survivors and the prevention. All of it is just incredible. So where can people find you and support you?
All over social media. That's how you found me. Instagram is Aziza Kibibi, at Aziza Kibibi, AZIZA KIBIBI. My website is azizakibibi.com. The organization's website is preciouslittleladies.org. And you can find me on YouTube, TikTok. You just Google my name and I will pop up somewhere.
Amazing. We will put all those
and
links
also
in the
my
description. Oh, you have a book. I didn't know that.
Yes, I wrote a memoir called Unashamed, A Life Tainted, and it initially started off as a therapeutic work. And then something just told me, well, a combination of things. I think spiritually, I started to be aware of the power, I guess you can say, or the impact that my story would have on other people. And then when I went to college, I tried to test that in one of my public speaking classes. I then shared my story as practice. And there was one of my classmates who was very quiet came and she told me that she was also abused by her father and she hadn't told anyone else, but she was inspired by me sharing mine. So that's when I realized I decided to take this therapeutic work and publish it. So that's available on Amazon, also on my website.
Amazing.
Apparently it's very good. I'm working on the audiobook now, so.
Well, I'm going to have to get one of them. I would love to read it. We'll put those links in the description as well. So the very last thing I need from you is your Linda Listen moment. If you have a sassy statement, as a viral video with her toddler goes, or something more inspirational, whichever you choose.
Linda, listen, I think, so this is one thing that I do tell many people, and I think it's more along the sassy side, but it is inspiring. I think it's more a level of clarity, right, and understanding. So, Linda, listen. Change is not made in comfort zones. If you want to have an impact on the world, if you want to change a bad situation, you have to accept that there's going to be some discomfort. But understand that if in the negative space that you might be in the first place, you are resilient enough to suffer through that, then you have the strength and the resilience to then do what's necessary and get through the discomfort of making a positive change. Because what's on the other side is it's amazing. It's amazing and definitely worth it.
Yes, well, you are a testament to that. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I'm honored to be able to hear your story today, and I just really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. And I appreciate your platform. Thank you for creating this platform.
Yes, of course. It's I mean, I wouldn't have it without people willing to share. So can't do it without you guys. Do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
I have so many thoughts. It's going to be hard to
a second episode.
Put it out, right? Definitely a second episode. But much love to everyone, and I wish you all well on your healing journeys.
Beautiful. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave those words of encouragement down below for Aziza. They mean so much to our guests. They do read the comments, and it does boost the algorithm. Even if you leave an emoji, it helps tell YouTube to send this out to more people so we can continue to raise awareness and find more advocates. If you want to be an advocate, hitting that subscribe button also helps share the video to more people. We really appreciate that. If you want to support further, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have a website where you can get some merch at cults2consciousness.com. We are all going to Mexico at the end of the year in October. Super excited for that. If you want to join us, we have 3 more spots as of today's recording at a discounted rate. So check that out. Link is in the description. And if you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious and be well.